Hey everybody, Steve Hupp here, Practice Director for Field Service at Thunder, with another SFS tip video where I take a question from the field service communities, whether it be the partner community or the customer community, and I attempt to go in and configure a solution or a foundation of a solution in the hopes of trying to help the poster, as well as helping anyone else who might be thinking along the same lines or has a similar question. So today's question is all about fixed routes. So the question was really around, well, how in field service can you produce a fixed route or configure it to spit out a fixed route, that could be recurring or not, but just basically a fixed route, right? A set of stops that are going to need to be repeated and need to be set in a specific order. And I'm going to go on record in saying that I don't really like fixed routes in general, especially for field service, because I feel you're not really getting the value of the tool, right? Field service is all about getting the right person to the right place at the right time. And so a series of predetermined steps or stops that have already been, put together by a human or maybe by a third-party system, and then just kind of forcing that into the system. It's not really letting the algorithm or the scheduling logic do everything that it does best, which is, getting that perfect schedule, using the rules and objectives and things like that. But that was the question, and I've never really gone in and tested it before, so I was very interested. I did provide a recommendation to the poster initially, before I was able to go in and test, which really aligned to using priority on, say, the work order or service appointment to guide the scheduling logic to try to produce a fixed route. So the idea is that, you have a scheduling policy with no other objectives. You set up your data, right? Your routes and your stops and things like that. You generate your work orders and service appointments. And then when you go to optimize, right, or schedule, you send it into optimization. And if there's no other objectives and you've got the priority filled in, there is a priority objective for those who don't know in optimization that does, order the appointments in order of importance based off of the priority field, that it would, order them accordingly and potentially spit out a relatively fixed schedule. So what I'm going to walk through is kind of what I did to set that up, the results that I saw, right? And if I ended up confirming my recommendation, or if I ended up coming to a completely different conclusion. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into Salesforce and we'll walk through. So it all starts with a route, right? So again, this could be, these could be other objects and things like that. I just went kind of the simplest path and said, look, you're going to have your data somewhere, right? You're going to have these routes and these stops and things like that stored somewhere, so you can reference them and you can generate the work orders and the service appointments based off of that data. So I started with a route. So I've got a route here. In my case, I did just assign it to a service resource right out of the gate. I totally understand there's use cases where a route may be produced and then assigned as in its entirety to a resource later. But in this case, I have a service resource assignment and I've got it assigned to a territory. I've got all of my stops here, again, ordered in sequential order in the order of execution for our fixed route. And then I also created a formula field because I wanted to calculate, right, an ascending type priority value that aligned to the stop execution numbers. And within the field service settings, I did create my own custom priority field on the work order, and I'm using the 1 to 100 scale, right? So I knew I was going to do 20 different stops, so it increments all the way up to 100, giving me a really good range of priority that, again, based off my assumptions initially, would have, ordered the appointments in that order for scheduling. Just looking at one of my stops here, I did, just for my own testing, I put a lot of lookups on here. I put in the account, the contact, the asset, because these things can be different for stops on a route, right? A route may not just encompass a single account. You may have a number of different accounts, a number of different assets that are all associated to the same route for one reason or another. And then I also have the work type down here, because again, you could have varying types of work per stop. I did put in address fields here. These are just text fields. I didn't use the new address fields. It's still in beta. I had some issues with them the last time I tested them. So I just went ahead and created my own address fields. So now that I've got my data together, and for those of you who have worked with me in the past probably won't be surprised, I built a flow. And the reason why I did that is because I'm very declarative. I'm not a coder. I don't code. So, the idea that I put forth in the recommendation up until now was, you build out your routes, right? Which I have. I've got my route. I've got who it's assigned to. I've got the stops. Well, now I need to generate the work orders and the service appointments. So I built a flow that can be executed right here off the Gantt. And I'm going to create my routes. I'm going to select my route and use priority. Some of the other boxes here is just the iterations that I went through in order to see the different behaviors of the scheduling logic, which I'll kind of talk through as we go. But in this case, I'm just going to create my records. And then my Gantt's going to refresh because my flow is going to execute. And while that's happening, I'm just going to go into my flow. So this is the flow that I built. Very, very simple and straightforward, right? I basically just took the route, I queried for the stops, I sorted them from in ascending order from 1 to 20. And then I just literally looped through and took the data from the stop and just started assigning work order values and then added it to a collection and then created all the work orders at the end, right? So in the end, I get 20 work orders, 20 service appointments. The priority field has been updated accordingly based off the priority that was on the stop. And then I also have another flow, just very, very small one I'm not going to show here, but to add the resource preferences upon creation. Because I do have that service resource assigned to the route. So as the work orders are getting created, I'm actually creating those resource preferences of type required for that resource to make sure that that's the only person that the work orders can get assigned to. So now if I close my flow here, you see there's my service appointments, right? So all these service appointments are parented by the work orders that I created. I did have in the work type to auto create the service appointments. So all of those are here. So now I've got my 20 service appointments that are ready to be scheduled. So now, based off the recommendation I made to the poster, the idea is to send these into optimization without any other objectives in the policy to have that priority objective actually influence, right, a close to or a fixed route based on the fact that I'm saying, hey, stop 1 needs to be the first appointment scheduled, stop 2 needs to be second, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to send this into resource schedule optimization. So for those who aren't familiar, resource schedule optimization, it's a full optimization call. The data is getting sent to the optimization engine. It's going through all the iterations and everything like that to find the best possible schedule, but it's doing it on a singular resource. And this, this was great for my use case here because I've got, these 20 appointments that I know I'm going to assign to a single user based off of the resource preferences on the work order level. So I can just run this on Allen Reed. So I'm going to have it optimize only unscheduled appointments because these are unscheduled. I've got my scheduling policy here, which is my customer first, but with no other objectives, right? So I have no objectives associated to this policy whatsoever. And then I've got my a little filter here that I put on the service appointment just so I could check the box and make sure that the only ones that get sent into optimization are my appointments I'm trying to test. So I'm going to click optimize. And again, the theory that I had here was that the optimization logic was going to take those appointments, was going to order them based off the priority value that I had already configured, and then was going to spit them back out in a more, fixed route type of pattern because there's no other objectives, right? There's no minimized travel, there's no ASAP, there's nothing like that. But what I found, and this is probably indicative to the same results I got here, is these appointments are not in order in any way, shape, or form, right? So I can see it looks like number 7's first, then 6, 3, so on and so forth, right? So didn't happen the way I expected, right? Which was a surprise to me. And it prompted me to reach out to my friend at Salesforce who's in the success team. And we kind of talked through it in Slack. And he educated me a little bit, which is great because I can just share this with everybody here. The priority objective that I've been speaking about does in fact order the appointments, right, by importance based off that priority field if you have it configured that way. However, it really only becomes relevant when you have not as much space as there are appointments to schedule. So for instance, if you have space enough to fit 1 appointment, but 3 appointments still need to be scheduled, the highest priority appointment is going to take precedent. But when you have an empty Gantt and when you have enough space for all of the appointments that are going through optimization to be scheduled, the priority objective is not going to impact near as much as it would if there wasn't as much space. So again, the result that I saw was not uncommon and was actually intended because without any other objectives, optimization is just kind of going through iterations of the best schedule it can find, and then eventually it gets to a point where it says, yep, it's as good as it can get, and I'm going to send it back, which is not in the order that they are supposed to be in according to our fixed route criteria. So this brought me to the conclusion that, in order to really do a fixed route, at least in my opinion, based off what I've seen, it really is going to require some manual intervention by the schedulers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unschedule all these appointments. So I'm just going to select them all here. I'm going to unschedule. Okay. Now, everything that I've done up until now, I do think is 100% valid in terms of what you need to do in order to set up fixed routes, right? You're going to need to create your routes. You're going to need to create your stops, create your data sets that you can reference that when you go to actually generate your work orders and service appointments on whatever level you need to, daily, weekly, whatnot. And then once the data is generated, then I think, a scheduler or dispatcher is going to need to come in and actually schedule these out. Now, the nice thing is that when I did my query for the service appointments or for the work orders to create them initially, I did order the stops from lowest to highest number, right? Which was great because the work orders were then created in sequential order, which means the service appointments are in sequential order as well. So now all I can do as a dispatcher, right, if maybe there was an overnight batch job or a scheduled flow that was running to create all of the data, I could simply come in and as part of my day, I could just select all these appointments, right, select them all, and then just hit schedule. And then this is a bulk scheduled job, but it is running through each appointment one at a time, right, in sequential order, because that's how I have them sorted. And it's then putting these appointments on the Gantt. And as we'll start to see as it builds up, it's going to go in order. It's going to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, so on and so forth. So it's going to build our defined fixed route based off of the stop value. So it's great, right? It's exactly what we were hoping to accomplish within this use case. Now, just a quick side note, I did attempt a number of iterations of this where I actually tried to query the service appointments after they were created and loop through them and use the auto schedule checkbox to see if I could get this to go automatically. Because obviously the one drawback to this approach is that there's still some manual intervention here. What I found, though, is because the auto schedule checkbox is an asynchronous process, no matter what I did, whether I tried to update the service appointment in the loop, which is not a recommended best practice, or I tried to assign the auto schedule, checkbox value and then update them all at the end, when they got on the Gantt, they definitely were not put on there in the order in which I was expecting them to, because it's asynchronous. They were getting processed at different times, and getting put on the Gantt at different times. So we still didn't get that fixed route solution that we were looking for. So again, after doing all those iterations, that's what really took me back to, there is going to need to be some manual intervention in order to get this done. Now, the nice thing is, even though there is manual intervention, I still think there are ways that you can, create some synergies here, right? Again, you could create a batch job or a scheduled flow to create the data automatically. So that isn't a manual process. And then you could also create, dedicated list views for your routes. So it could be incorporated as just part of the daily tasks of a scheduler or dispatcher, where they have to go in and schedule the routes for the next day or the next week or what have you, in terms of getting those scheduled and getting on the Gantt week in and week out type of thing. And I like this better. Again, my personal opinion is this is better than just programmatically forcing it on the Gantt in a specific way, like forcing in the assigned resources and things like that, because what you get there is you can have some travel time calculation issues where you force it on the Gantt and travel's calculated, and then all of a sudden you've got a bunch of overlaps and you got to go adjust and things like that. So this approach at least allows the scheduler to use the scheduling logic, right, going through one at a time and then scheduling them out accordingly. And if I hover over here, we can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, scheduled them in order exactly as we intended. So finally, the last thing I want to hit on is the primary reason why I think there's a happy medium here, right? Because as I said in the beginning, I'm not a huge fan of fixed routes. I don't think that field service is the best tool to use for fixed routes, even though I've proven here that it could be done with some automation, with some manual intervention. It is possible. But I think there's a happy medium where, if you have a bunch of routes or a bunch of stops that are associated to a route, I feel like you could, allow optimization to actually create you the best series of where those stops are supposed to be, right? In what order, based off of all the objectives or the objectives that you have in your scheduling policy. Now, I fully understand that not every use case is going to be like that, right? Like trash collection, for example, those stops, they are what they are, right? Maybe it's because you're in downtown New York and you got to go down certain streets and certain streets are one ways. So it's not always going to be the case. And I totally respect and understand that. However, if it's just a matter of hey, I've got all these stops that I need to allocate to a route and that route needs to get assigned to a service resource, I don't really care what order they're in as long as the service resource can effectively complete those. I think that you could absolutely do everything I just did. Create the routes, the stops, everything, generate your data through automation. And then now you can allow optimization to actually put that route onto the schedule the way that it should be, right, based off of the objectives you're looking to align to. So in order to highlight that, I'm going to unschedule these. Before I do, I want to point out, so right now I've got 8 minutes of travel time on average between all these jobs, right, which isn't bad. It's not bad to have 8 minutes of travel time. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to unschedule these really quickly. I'm just going to unschedule. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to send them back into optimization, but this time I'm actually going to send them into optimization with a policy that has objectives in it, right? So minimize travel and ASAP. So I'm simply going to go back to Alan Reed here. I'm going to run RSO again. This time I'm going to run it with my customer first policy, which has my minimize travel, ASAP. Minimize travel is heavily weighted, like 4-to-1 compared to ASAP in my policy, right? So I'm gonna send this in to optimization, and we're gonna see what we get. And again, this is that happy medium approach where, you've got a bunch of stops that have to be allocated to a route, that have to be assigned to a resource, but you don't really care in which order they're going to happen in as long as they get completed. And so as we can see, right, definite huge improvements in overall travel time. In fact, optimization was able to cut travel time in half. So by taking away the notion of the fixed route in that they have to be done in a certain order, you can let optimization take those same group of stops and create a very efficient schedule and then align to things like minimizing travel in between jobs. And you can imagine how much more exponential value you're going to gain across 15, 20, 25, 30, 45 resources if you're taking, if you're able to save half of the travel time, right, on every resource, each and every day, by simply allowing the scheduling logic to do what it does best, which is take a series of appointments and find the best possible schedule for those appointments, which in the back end could be allocated to a specific route, which could be assigned to a specific individual, a specific resource. So that's it. So I hope that you enjoyed the video. Again, I love these types of questions because my initial, gut reaction, I made a recommendation to investigate, and going in and testing it, I found out that my recommendation was wrong and it wasn't going to operate the way that I thought it was going to. So I was able to go in and test it. Super excited to get to the endpoint that I did and figure out what, I feel like the best approach would be to solving this particular use case. So as always, thank you very much for the time. If there's anything that myself or Thunder can do for your field service implementation, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. Thanks so much.